The divers had been working this wreck for years before anyone understood what the iron was for. An underwater drone drops through the surf off Clifton in Cape Town, past the swimmers, past the rocks, into water that goes dark fast. Its lights sweep a debris field barely 100 meters from the beach. Broken timber, copper fastening, and blocks of iron scattered across the seabed. Far more iron than a ship this size should ever have needed. Treasure hunters found this site in the 1980s. They logged it as a Dutch vessel and moved on. The iron is the reason they were wrong. And if a ship that took more than 200 people to the bottom could sit unrecognized off a public beach for 2 centuries, how many more are still down there with no name on them? Clifton is a beach. People swim there. There are apartments on the slope above it and a road that runs along the water, and on a clear day you can see straight down through the shallows. The wreck sits about 100 meters out. The ship was called the São José Paquete de Africa. It was Portuguese. It left Lisbon on the 27th of April, 1794, under a captain named Manuel João, with a crew of 35, and it was not going to Brazil. Not yet. It was going to Mozambique first. If your picture of the slave trade is West Africa to the Caribbean, the map in the textbook, the thick arrows crossing the Atlantic from Ghana and Senegal and Benin, this ship is the part that map leaves off. The Portuguese had been running captives out of West Africa for 300 years by 1794. That coast was crowded, it was contested, and in the 1790s, the sugar plantations of northeastern Brazil needed more people than the old routes could supply. So the traders went around the other side of the continent. The São José sailed to Ilha de Mozambique, Mozambique Island, then the capital of Portuguese Mozambique. It is a small coral island off the East African coast, barely 3 kilometers long, with a stone fortress at one end and a town of coral block houses packed onto the rest of it. It had been Portuguese since the 1500s. It was the administrative center of an entire colony, and it was about as far from the Atlantic slave map as it is possible to get and still be in Africa. The ship arrived, it loaded. The manifest for that voyage survives. It is held today in the Arquivo Histórico Ultramarino in Lisbon, the overseas archive of the Portuguese Empire, the paperwork of 400 years of colonies, filed and bound and kept. It records 512 enslaved Mozambicans taken aboard the São José. They were not from the island. The island was the exit. They were brought to it from the mainland across the channel and from further inland. And the island is where they stopped being people in the record and started being a number in a column. The ship departed Mozambique Island on the 3rd of December, 1794, bound for Maranhão on the Brazilian coast. It made it 24 days. 24 days is the part that gets skipped. It is a line on a route map. What it actually was, for the 512, was 3.5 weeks chained in a hold in December going south, which in the southern hemisphere means going into summer and going into the Cape. On the 27th of December, the São José came around the Cape of Good Hope in a storm. The Cape is one of the worst pieces of water on Earth. The winds are variable. The swell comes from 2 oceans at once, and the coastline is rock. Manuel João hugged the shore, looking for shelter from the wind. That is what killed the ship. At Clifton, it struck submerged rocks roughly 100 meters from the beach, and it began to break apart in the surf. The crew got a line to shore. All 35 of them survived. Behind them, in a hold, were 512 people who had been chained for 24 days. Roughly 212 of them died in the water that night. About 300 made it to the beach. And within weeks, every one of those 300 survivors was sold into slavery in Cape Town. They had crossed nothing. They had not reached Brazil. They had been taken from Mozambique, chained for 3.5 weeks, shipwrecked, half of them drowned, and the ones who lived were walked up a beach and sold on the spot. The site was known. That is worth sitting with for a moment. This was not a wreck lost in deep ocean, unreachable, waiting for technology to catch up. It was in the shallows off a beach in a major city. Treasure hunters were down there in the 1980s, pulling things up, filing reports. They decided it was an earlier Dutch ship, and they stopped looking. What was actually on that seabed was timber, copper fastening, a wooden pulley block, the remains of shackles, and iron. Blocks of iron, a lot of them. To understand what the iron means, you have to understand what ballast is for. Every ship needs weight low in the hull or it rolls over. A ship carrying dense cargo makes its own ballast. Timber, sugar, ore, all of it sits in the bottom and does the job for free. The cargo is the counterweight. People are not dense. A human being is mostly water. Packed into a hold, a person occupies a great deal of volume and delivers very little weight. A ship built to carry people instead of goods has a physics problem, and the solution to that problem was iron. You load iron in the bottom so the ship stays upright with a hold full of human beings. So the iron scattered on the seabed off Clifton is not evidence that there were people aboard. The iron is a measurement of how many, and here is the detail that closes it. The manifest shows what the São José was carrying when it left Lisbon, before it ever reached Africa, before a single captive came aboard. 1,500 blocks of iron ballast, bound for Mozambique. They were not cargo to sell. They were equipment. The ship sailed out of Europe carrying the counterweight, because everyone involved already knew exactly what was going to be loaded on the other end and roughly how much it would fail to weigh. So here is the whole thing, laid end to end. A Portuguese ship leaves Lisbon in April with 1,500 blocks of iron in the bottom of it because the iron is the tool. It sails to an island off East Africa and loads 512 human beings, and the iron holds the ship upright against them. It leaves on the 3rd of December for Brazil. It lasts 24 days. It hits rock 100 meters from a beach in a storm and comes apart in the surf. 35 crew go up a rope and live. 212 people drown within sight of land they had never seen before and had not chosen to come to. 300 reach the sand and are sold in the same city within weeks into the same institution the ship existed to serve. And then it sits there for 221 years in the shallows off a public beach while people swim above it, and the iron that counted them lies scattered on the bottom in plain view. That is the São José. It is not a mystery. It was never a mystery. The paperwork is complete. The Slave Wrecks Project found the captain's account of the wrecking in the Western Cape archives around 2010 and 2011. In 2012, they found the manifest in Lisbon. Between the two documents, the identification held the ship, the voyage, the cargo, the date, the rocks, the count. If this is your history, and nobody ever showed you the map it actually belongs on, subscribe. That is what this channel is for. The Slave Wrecks Project launched in 2008. It is not one institution. It is the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, Iziko Museums of South Africa, George Washington University, the South African Heritage Resources Agency, the United States National Park Service, the African Center for Heritage Activities, and a group called Diving with a Purpose, Black divers trained in underwater archaeology. That last one matters more than it sounds. Maritime archaeology is an expensive field with a narrow door. It requires dive certification, boat time, equipment, and years of training, and for most of its history, the people who could afford that door were not the descendants of the people on the bottom. Diving with a Purpose exists to change the arithmetic. It trains black divers in underwater archaeology and puts them on the sites that belong to their own history. The São José was found by people looking for treasure, and it was misidentified for 30 years. It took people who were looking for their own ancestors to go back to the same seabed and see what was on it. The excavation work in Clifton Bay is genuinely difficult. The surf that broke the ship is still there. It is shallow. It is violent. The visibility closes down to nothing, and the site is scattered across a rocky bottom that shifts with every swell. There is no calm, deep-water platform, no still green light, none of the conditions that make underwater archaeology look elegant in a documentary. Teams dredged the bay by hand. Divers worked in surge that could put them into rock. And what comes up out of seawater after 2 centuries is not an artifact yet. It is a problem. Iron in salt water converts, swells, and cracks itself apart the moment it hits air. Every block had to be stabilized before it could be anything. A conservation student from Cheikh Anta Diop University in Senegal spent hours brushing tannic acid onto São José ballast to stop 200 years of ocean from finishing what it started. That is what the recovery actually looked like. Not a moment of discovery. Years of surge, dredging, and tannic acid. And then, on the 2nd of June, 2015, they did something that was not archaeology at all. Divers from Mozambique, from South Africa, and from the United States went out to the wreck site together. With them, they carried a basket made by a Mozambican artisan, and in the basket was soil. The soil came from Mossoril, on the Mozambican mainland across the water from Mozambique Island. That is the ground those 512 people were taken from. They carried it across the ocean the São José had crossed, and they put it down on the wreck. 221 years after the ship went under, someone finally brought them a handful of home. The São José is the first known shipwreck of a slave ship that foundered with enslaved people still aboard to be identified, archaeologically documented, excavated, and conserved. Not the first slave ship ever found. The first one found with the people still accounted for in it. That distinction carries weight in 3 directions. It means the first such wreck ever identified is Mozambican, not West African. The ship that finally gave the trade a physical, excavated, touchable site came off the Indian Ocean, from a coast that most accounts of slavery barely mention. It means the East African branch of the trade, the branch that fed Brazil, the branch that was expanding in exactly the decade this ship sailed, is underdocumented in a way that has nothing to do with a shortage of evidence and everything to do with where people chose to look. And it means the map most people were handed is not wrong, exactly. It is incomplete in a specific direction. It shows the Atlantic. It does not show the other side of the continent, and the other side of the continent was busy. 2 days after the wreck, on the 29th of December, 1794, Captain Manuel João went before a court in Cape Town and gave his official testimony. He described the storm. He described the rocks. And he accounted for the loss of property. The property included the people. That document is the reason we know their number. It is also the reason we do not know their names. We have the manifest. We have the count. We have the court record. We have, in the archives of the Western Cape, the prices the 300 survivors sold for once they were walked up the beach at Clifton and put on the block. 512 people. Not one name. The archive kept the transaction and lost the human being every single time on purpose, because a name is not necessary to record the loss of property. That is not an accident of history. That is the design. The family who owned the São José did not stop. After 1794, they kept trading, and they completed several more voyages, carrying Mozambicans to Maranhão and selling them onto the sugar plantations. The wreck was a bad quarter. That was all it was. Historians estimate that something like 1,000 slave ships went down during the centuries the trade ran. 1,000 wrecks. Somewhere upward of 12 million people were trafficked in total, and the ships that failed took an unknown fraction of them straight to the bottom, mid-passage, chained, with no record beyond an insurance claim. The São José is one. It is the first that was found, named, excavated, and understood. There are roughly 999 more. The Slave Wrecks Project is still diving. The archives in Lisbon and Cape Town and Rio de Janeiro are still being read, page by page, by people who know what they are looking for now. The artifacts from the São José, the iron, the pulley block, are at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, and the full collection is at the Isiko Slave Lodge in Cape Town in a permanent exhibition in the city where the survivors were sold. And somewhere off a coastline where people swim, there is another debris field with too much iron in it. It is waiting the same way the São José waited, until someone finally thinks to look.